What's up, everyone? Another day, another video introducing you to the teams that are participating at VCT Ascension Pacific 2024. It's going to be 10 teams participating for that one spot to get into VCT Pacific starting next year. Obviously, the tournament kicks off on the 20th of September, happening in Jakarta, Indonesia, and we've covered 3 teams, which leaves quite a few left, but most importantly, we actually still have one more team left to cover in the very first round of the bracket. And it's none other than Prisa Gaming representing Korea. Now, bear with me just a bit during this episode if you feel a little bit of bias, because come on, I've been following this scene, the challenger scene in Korea, so closely this entire year. We watch partied almost every single match, and I got to see not only Prisa Gaming make it all the way to Ascension, but also just the overall scene grow. And it's been quite exciting, especially as someone who resides here in Korea, and I was hoping to see the scene continue to grow and improve throughout the years. So I'm just putting that disclaimer out there. But let's talk about the overview of Challengers Korea in 2024. Like I just said, 2024 was actually a pretty exciting year. There were quite a few improvements just across the board in terms of individual raw firepower, understanding of the game, meta and compositions. We got set plays, things like that. It's been a steady improvement, especially since the top teams kind of left the Challenger scene for VCT Pacific. We had the rebirth of a streamer team as well, Team I Am, this time led by Dwenmo, one of the biggest YouTubers here in Korea for Valorant. Yo-Man returned, obviously the old glorious IGL of Shadow Corp, going over to Rare Atom in China. And then since this release, he came back to Korea, joined Nongshim Red Force, and there were a lot of rookies to draw attention as well. One of the rosters that drew attention was, in fact, Prisa Gaming. And while they did hit a roadblock in Split 1 by not qualifying in the very final match, they fully delivered on the hype in Split 2, becoming the eventual winners and representatives for Ascension. Let's take a look at that roster. If there was ever a roster with clear defined roles, this would be one of them, as you can see on your screens. But let me introduce you to the players first. You've got Domby, Ivy, Francis, Persia, and Margaret. It should be noted that Persia and Margaret weren't part of the roster that tried to qualify for Split 1, but they were brought in afterwards, qualified for Split 2, and they were a big part of their success in Split 2 as well. Taking a look at the roles, not too much to expand here. Domby is the duelist, and he's kind of played all the popular ones that we've seen recently, except for the Yoru, but we'll get to that, as Francis was the one playing that, kind of revolving around the flashes and the info gaining. But the Rays, obviously a go-to here for Domby, but his Neon was very, very good. And the ISO, actually quite reliable as well. Domby's a bit of a flashy player. He definitely has some highlight moments, but also he's not scared to be the duelist, right? To be the entry, so to speak. So it's not like he's just looking for his own highlights, but it's also that he understands his role is to go in, create space, things like that. Then you got Ivy, the MVP of the grand finals, and his flexibility for one is very big. Obviously, I think he has mastered deadlock. I think he's shown some of the best deadlock uses I've ever seen in any type of professional competitive setting. So if they do play this again, which we'll get to, and I don't know if they will, but if they do, I think Ivy's a player to watch out for. If you're wondering, okay, what does peak deadlock performance look like? I would say he's one of those that you want to watch out for. But outside of that, he had great performances on the Silva in the grand finals. Obviously, he's filling in on the Viper and whatever else needs to be done for the team. And I think whenever you have someone like this, where they are willing to be flexible, but they still have pretty good mastery of all the agents that they can, get creative with it, that's a huge benefit for the team. Francis has the IGL for this team, mainly playing the initiators, mainly playing flash initiators. It seems really just kind of playing that setup role for the rest of his team, and then helping gain that information, go for the trades, things like that. Persia, the controller, the rock steady oldest member of the group. They always kind of make fun of him because everyone else is very, very young. They're all youngsters. And then Persia, he's got a lot of experience under his belt, both in Valorant and other games. So Persia's kind of like the mental leader, right? The one who keeps the calm. And then you have Margaret, who, we'll get to him, but he's only played Cypher. Well, he's the Sentinel, that's for sure. There's no doubt he's the Sentinel, but this isn't a bug, he has literally played one agent all Split 2. Before we move on from the roster sheet, I also want to note that they actually just recently, just a month ago, brought in an extra coach. They actually brought in the coach of SLT Songnam, one of the other competitors in Challengers Korea. SLT Songnam made a huge run from underdogs all the way to grand finals of Split 1, and they continue to perform quite well in Split 2. So I'm actually pretty hyped for this because a lot of credit to the coaching staff. I mean, this was a team where in their first week of Split 1, I looked at them and I said, well, they're getting relegated. And then they made the grand finals. So clearly the coaching staff kind of knew what they were doing. So it's great to see that Prisa Gaming said, okay, we're going to need a little bit of extra help identifying how to fight all these other teams that we've never really faced before in any matches. So we got Coach So Sung Min coming in as an analyst and an assistant coach for Prisa Gaming, specifically for Ascension Pacific. Taking a closer look at the road SPG took all the way to Ascension, it started pretty rough for this squad of youngsters. Despite the high expectations, obviously, they hit a roadblock at the very end of the qualifiers for Split 1, where they lose to the eventual Split 1 winners, LFG Portal. Murmurs behind the scenes still claimed that Prisa Gaming would come back and take the whole thing, and they absolutely delivered. They pick up Persia and Margaret, which happened to be massive boons for the team, and then they held back nothing starting right from the promotion match to get into Split 2, showcasing some beautiful usage of the Cypher Lock composition on Bind. This bind, by the way, would prove to be an incredible weapon for this team as it continued to get played in a lot of their matches, a total of 8 times throughout the entire split. And this was by far their best map. So, obviously the draft not going so well for their opponents, but the squad showcasing a combination of great individual mechanics, very creative lineups with the deadlock, some good set plays and tactics using their composition, and solid clutch factor as well. And while Bind was the map that showcased us the best for the majority of the season, I would say that all these strong points of this team kind of trickled down into the other maps as well. There are other maps where they were trying to play kind of unique compositions, something a little bit more creative, a little bit ahead of the meta, things like the ISO Yoru, and they were showcasing why it would be so powerful and how they understood the pros and cons of each composition. The meta was never the problem for Prisa Gaming. I mean, they were leading and researching the meta, if anything, as they were utilizing everything that was kind of popularized at least a little bit in 2024, right? Things like I mentioned, like the deadlock, Neon was used quite well, the ISO Yoru combos on different maps like Haven. I mean, you name it, SPGs played it. It was actually getting to the point where I had a bit of fear that such a dominant team would eventually have their weaknesses shown in like the most important matches, maybe something like the grand finals to get into Ascension, or their initial matches at Ascension. And we've seen that story play out before, and it's very unfortunate. In comes Nongshim Red Force, another team I was very excited for, led by the former Rare Atom IGL, Yeoman. They were a bit inconsistent for the whole season, but they lock it down by the end and actually push Prisa Gaming all the way to 5 maps of the grand finals. SPG actually almost looks like they might be out of gas because the star players, Dombi, the Duelist, and Margaret, the Sentinel, the ones who kind of carried a lot on their individual potential for a lot of the season, started to get shut down. They were getting targeted, and it looked like, okay, this might be the end of the road for SPG. But that's where Persia and Ivy come in, showcase that there's still a very strong backline here on SPG, and the calling from Francis continues to adapt quite well just in time to help them cross the finish line, which does make it pretty hard to pick out a key player or two. I think there's a reason, just like we had with Revenant, where, whether it's a story, whether it's their skill set to highlight any of these 5 players, but I am going to pick Persia and Margaret. Now, Dombi was a strong candidate, but I feel like Dombi, you'll watch the games and you'll pay attention to him. Like, he's pretty flashy. So I think you'll have no problem finding why you might want to watch out for Dombi. But let's talk about Persia and Margaret. Persia, I mean, the solid rock here for SPG. He's playing that controller, but one of the scariest things about Persia is that his positioning, his timings are so good. He's in the right place at the right time so often for this team that he's able to get impact frags, just getting, whether it's multi-kills, whether it's getting trades, but he is able to kind of be the linchpin that holds together the entire round. And when push comes to shove, he is ice cold. He's calm just throughout the entire match, no matter how strenuous it gets. And the team oftentimes talks about it in their interviews where they say, I mean, he's the one who kind of keeps us together. He's the rock of the team. You know, he keeps things calm. And obviously the veterancy really starting to shine through here for Persia. And we talk about players like Mako, for instance, on DRX, and just how important it is to have a controller who's reliable, right? On any kind of situation. They're not going out and dying first. They're not taking unnecessary risks. But I would say Persia, he's willing to take some risks, but there's always this specific goal of I need to be in the right place at the right time. And I think the reads he has to get to the right place at the right time and understand exactly how much control he needs to take of the map, or, you know, different cross angles for his teammates. This is huge because I have to imagine, obviously I'm not in the team comms, but the way they play, I think Persia doing a lot of this allows for the youngsters to kind of run free, right? Play to their freedom and their strengths and do their own thing. As Persia, they know that Persia's got their back. And the stats speak for themselves in the grand finals as well. I mean, he tops the board with plus 16 kills, 78 total kills in a best of 5. Not the, you know, not a crazy amount that we've seen. It's all spread out pretty evenly. But if it's a tight match like this, going to map 5, right? You don't know who's going to win, and your controller is consistently the one coming out on top. I would say that that's huge. That is a lot of pressure off your back. The other player I want to talk about is Margaret. And the real reason I want to talk about Margaret is, will he play anything other than the Cypher? This guy has played 607 rounds of Cypher in Split 2. Every single round. At some point, he has to start getting bored, if anything. Like, he's literally only played Cypher. All of their compositions revolve around the Cypher. All of their compositions revolve around him anchoring, him lurking, going for late timing lurks, you know, holding push outs with his trap wires, having different setups, and then winning 1v1 duels. Like, everything. It started with the bind, and that's where it really shined, but every other map as well. And Margaret's good enough that I don't blame them for relying on that. But what we started to see on maps like the bind, where there was so much data, is that teams started to bring out different agents, right? Opponents would sometimes bring out the Sova on bind to say, okay, we're destroying all your trap wires. Now Margaret's kind of in a pressure to say, okay, how do I hold all these angles on my own, right? Am I gonna just be in 1v1s? How do I win this 1v2? Things like that. It starts to pressure him. They always try to take him out with more than one member, right? So it's not a 1v1. Now it's a 1v2, 1v3. They give him that respect. They don't shy away from that, because I think teams started to realize, okay, if we kind of ignore Margaret and say, okay, we know he's there, but we're going to ignore him, he's going to get free space, as he always does. And then if he and he's very good at finding timings. He was very, very solid at just peeking out at the right time, like catching someone from the back, things like that. So once teams realized, okay, like he's good, but we don't want to respect him too much, we want to shut that down, because that actually kind of ruins a lot of the setups that SPG has, we started to see SPG unravel a bit. I mean, that's how that bind started to falter. Some teams started to show a little bit of the cracks, and then the stronger teams like D plus Kia and Nongshim Red Force took advantage of it, and they started to get those wins against them on bind. So the question is I don't know, does he have a Killjoy prepared? Maybe a Chamber, maybe he's the one playing Deadlock. I mean, who knows what it might be. But if they don't change it, as much as Margaret is a good player, I think when you're playing against the best of each region, it's gonna be tough, because I would say that towards, you know, going into playoffs, Margaret started to get targeted quite a bit. I mean, oftentimes he was actually one of the best performing players on this team for the beginning half of Split 2. But once he started to get figured out a bit, you know, he was getting targeted. He wasn't able to get the free kills. And you could tell that it was starting to affect him a little bit as well. Now, obviously, you go through a full best of 5, right? You're going through this long split, winning the tournament. That's going to give him the experience to hopefully not get too shaken up, even if he gets targeted down, and knows that he can rely on his teammates to help cover his back. But that cannot be the only game plan you have. Big questions on what agents he's going to play. Does it continue to be the Cypher? And if it is, I mean, hopefully there's some kind of crazy innovation that we haven't thought of, because otherwise there's a lot of data on Margaret's tendencies with the Cypher. Take a quick look at their maps, which are actually not as dominant as some of the other teams we've taken a look at so far. And I think it just goes to show that, yes, they were pushed to their limits towards the end. Obviously, the Bind, as dominant as it was, I mean, a 6-game win streak is pretty strong. It eventually gets targeted, and they take those 2 losses, so it's not at that 100%. I would say the Ascent is one where this wasn't like a map they always went to. I mean, Bind was always their pick if it was open most of the time. So Ascent wasn't really their go-to. They play the ISO Euro. I imagine that's going to get retooled a little bit, as we saw that also getting targeted by Nongshim Red Force. But overall, you know, they still have very good, I think, fundamentals and a good fundamental understanding of Valorant and the maps, so that helped them carry through. Haven wasn't played much, so the 50% I wouldn't read into it too much. And I think the good news for Korean fans is that a lot of these big losses were from Nongshim Red Force. So 2 points to draw from there. First of all, okay. All right, so overall, there was a good elevation of skill, right? Average skill level here in Korea. So that's something to get excited about for the future. But second of all, I mean, Nongshim Red Force was a team I was hoping to be able to make Ascension. Like, I was very excited for his team. The potential seemed very high. So, you know, I think respect to Nongshim Red Force being able to target some of these weaknesses from SPG, but also that means that SPG now has that experience of saying, ooh, okay, these are our weaknesses. We can't just get through because we think we're better individually. So hopefully those are lessons learned. Sunset, overall, they've retooled quite a bit throughout the season, I would say, but eventually they landed on the Neon for the finals, and it works out great for them. Dombi's a great Neon. And the Abyss, it's probably still a little bit in flux. I think they changed an agent every single time they've played, but you know, it was never anything too wacky. So I think Abyss, they might even keep the last one they played, which I believe was the Silver Breach combo for the Initiators. So we'll see how that goes. But as you can see, I mean, still a pretty strong map pool, except they do have a permaban of Icebox. Banned every single time. And the big question is are you going to be prepared? Or is this going to be a permaban? Because here's the thing. You got away with the permaban in Challengers Korea because people were not banning out the Bind, and that kind of gave you a free win for pretty much every match until the semifinals and the grand final. So once you get there, once you get to this higher level of play and people understand your map pool, they're going to be better prepared. They have strong map pools. I don't think they're going to give you those freebies. So now it's going to start to act like a detriment. So whether it's the other maps now, you know, maybe you're just strong on 6 maps, that could be your goal, and you say just forget Icebox, or you at least have something prepared on Icebox where you don't feel the need to have to ban it. That's a big question mark, and that's a big piece of homework that they'll have to solve for themselves. So that was a quick look at some Prisa Gaming, the representatives for Korea going into VCT Ascension Pacific 2024. I just want to say, it's actually exciting to see that there's a creative and exciting team to root for from Korea, because Korean Valorant kind of started off on the back foot globally speaking. Yes, Vision Strikers, you know, the old DRX was very dominant, but it was oftentimes called the one team region for good reason. And even then, it was a very like textbook style of play, right? Very, very hard set plays, things like that. So it's nice to see that there's a group of youngsters, a new wave, a new generation of players that are very interested in Valorant, that are playing to their strengths, that are playing off of each other a little bit more off the cuff, but still having strong understandings of compositions and what the pros and cons are. I think this is all just great news for Korean Valorant. And I hope that they are able to keep up this momentum, right? Like Gen G won the first trophy for Asia this year as a Korean team. Overall, I think the Korean players and teams performed quite well in Pacific. And this is huge for the community out here in Korea. So even if SPG doesn't win Ascension, I hope they're able to keep up the hype and momentum in the play that they show at Ascension against some of these best teams around the world. And hopefully, maybe they will take it. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about some Prisa Gaming. Do you think that Korea can win another tournament here in 2024? Or is it going to be someone else? That's going to be it for the first round of the bracket here for VCT Ascension Pacific. And next up, we will be taking a look at the other teams that are waiting in the bracket in round 2. We'll see you then.